The Man Who Went to Hell and Came Back, a terrifying true story. There's a place worse than your worst nightmare. A place so terrifying that once you see it, you will never be the same. A man died for 7 minutes, and in those 7 minutes he saw hell. He heard the screams of the damned, he felt the burning flames, he saw the face of Satan himself, and by some miracle, he came back. But the real horror, what he saw in hell, is waiting for millions. This is his true story. Now, let's dive deep into this terrifying journey, step by step. Chapter 1: The Last Breath, a tragic accident. David Miller was an ordinary man with an ordinary life. He wasn't a bad person, at least not in his own eyes. He wasn't a murderer, a thief, or a liar. He lived like most people, focused on his job, his friends, and the things of this world. But he never cared about God. Religion is for weak people, he used to say. I don't need it. That belief would change forever. One rainy night, David was driving home after a long day at work. The highway was dark, wet, and nearly empty. His eyelids felt heavy. He had been working overtime for weeks, and exhaustion wrapped around him like a thick fog. Then, headlights. A massive truck swerved into his lane. The tires screeched. The world exploded into metal, glass, and fire. The last thing David heard was the sound of his own bones breaking. Then, everything went black. Chapter 2: The Darkness After Death. David expected to wake up in a hospital, but instead, he woke up in darkness. It wasn't just any darkness, it was a void. A place so empty, so silent that it felt like time itself had stopped. He called out, "Hello?" His voice didn't echo. It was swallowed by the void, as if the air itself was dead. Then, a sound, a distant scream. Not a human scream. Something worse. A scream so filled with pain, terror, and hopelessness that it made his skin crawl. Then another scream, and another. The darkness wasn't empty, it was full, and the souls inside were suffering. David's heart pounded. He tried to run, but his feet didn't touch the ground. He was floating or falling. Then he felt it, a presence, something watching him. And then the darkness opened its eyes. Chapter 3: The Descent into Hell. David plunged downward. The void ripped open, and he was pulled into a tunnel, a pit. The temperature skyrocketed. The air grew thick, heavy, and filled with a stench so awful that it burned his nostrils. Then, fire. Massive flames erupted below him. The heat was unbearable. But the worst part wasn't the fire. It was the voices. Thousands, no, millions of voices, screaming in agony. He landed hard on something rough and jagged. The ground beneath him was made of burning rock, scorching his hands. The sky above was not a sky at all, but a swirling abyss of fire and darkness. Then he saw them. People, or what was left of them. Their skin was charred and peeling, their eyes filled with endless pain. Some were trapped in cages, others chained to burning walls. And they weren't just screaming, they were begging, "Please, have mercy. God, forgive me." But there was no mercy here, only eternal suffering. Chapter 4: The Demons, the tormentors of hell. Then they appeared. Demons, massive, twisted creatures with horns, blackened wings, and glowing red eyes. Some walked on 2 legs like men, others slithered like snakes. Their claws dripped with the blood of the damned. One demon, towering 10 feet tall, spotted David. Its lips curled into a sickening grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Fresh meat," it hissed. David tried to run, but he had nowhere to go. The demon grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Its touch burned like fire, sinking into his flesh. "You don't belong here yet," the demon whispered, its breath reeking of rotting flesh. David's eyes widened. "Yet? You're still alive, human," the demon laughed. "But once your time is up, we will be waiting." Then he heard the footsteps. Something even worse was coming. Chapter 5: The Face of Satan. The ground shook. The demons bowed. David turned, his body trembling. A massive figure stepped through the flames. It was Satan. His presence sucked the air from the room. His body was covered in blackened armor, his wings spread wide, his eyes burned like twin suns. Just when he spoke, the entire pit of hell shuddered. "David Miller, you were meant to be mine." David's breath caught in his throat. "No, this can't be real." Satan smirked. "It's real and it's forever." Then he reached for David. His clawed hands stretched toward his soul. The final claim. David screamed. Then, a voice. Not from the darkness, not from hell, but from above. Not yet. A blinding light exploded. And then, David woke up. Chapter 6: The Return. A second chance. David's body jerked back to life in the hospital. The doctors gasped. The machines went crazy. He had been dead for 7 minutes. but he had seen eternity, and he had been given a second chance. Tears ran down his face. He clutched the Bible beside him and whispered, "Jesus, I will never doubt you again." From that moment, David's life changed forever. He began telling the world what he saw. Because hell is not just a story, it's real. And most people have no idea what's waiting for them. Chapter 7, The Awakening, A New Man. David lay in the hospital bed, his chest rising and falling with sharp, uneven breaths. His entire body ached, but the pain was nothing compared to what he had just escaped. The room was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor beside him. His hands trembled as he reached for the thin hospital blanket, his fingers cold, his skin clammy. "You're awake?" A nurse rushed in, her eyes wide with shock. "Mr. Miller, you were gone for 7 minutes." But for him, it felt like an eternity in hell. He swallowed hard, his throat dry and burning. Words failed him. How could he explain what he had just seen? How could he describe the horrors that were now permanently burned into his mind? The agonized screams, the faces twisted in pain, the flames licking at their skin. He couldn't. Tears welled in his eyes as he turned his gaze to the ceiling. "Jesus," he whispered, "thank you for saving me." His own words startled him. He had never prayed before. Chapter 8, The Nightmares Begin. The doctors called David's survival a miracle, but he knew better. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a warning. That night, as he lay in his hospital bed, sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, the visions returned. The burning pits, the tortured souls, the demon's eyes glowing with hunger. And worst of all, Satan's voice. "David Miller, you are meant to be mine." He sat up with a gasp, sweat dripping from his forehead. His heart raced, pounding against his ribs like a caged animal. Was this how it would be for the rest of his life? Haunted? Tormented? Or was there a way out? David didn't know, but one thing was clear: he could never be the same again. Chapter 9, Telling the World. No one believes him. David had to share what he had seen. He had been given a second chance. But what about the others? What about the people who didn't believe in hell? Who thought it was just a myth? He had to warn them. The first person he told was his best friend, Mark. Mark was a skeptic, just like David had once been. He was the type of person who laughed at religion, calling it fairy tales for weak minds. But now, David knew the truth, and the truth was more terrifying than any story. "Mark," David said, gripping his friend's shoulders, "I saw hell. It's real. And if we don't change, we're all going there." Mark stared at him. Then he laughed. "You? David, come on, man. You hit your head in the accident. You probably had some weird dream. That's all." David's stomach twisted. "No, it wasn't a dream. It was real. I saw people suffering. I saw demons. I saw..." Mark held up a hand. "David, stop. You're scaring me." "Good," David said, his voice shaking. "Because you should be scared. I was dead for 7 minutes, Mark. And in those 7 minutes, I saw what's waiting for people who reject God." Mark's smile faded. For a moment, it seemed like he was listening. But then he shook his head. "Look, man, you went through something traumatic. Maybe you should see a therapist. But don't go crazy with this hell stuff, okay?" David felt like his heart was breaking. No one believed him, but that wouldn't stop him. He had to keep speaking, even if the whole world mocked him. Chapter 10, The Bible, the Key to Truth. David had never owned a Bible before. Now he couldn't put it down. He spent hours flipping through its pages, searching for answers. And then he found it. Luke 16, verse 22 to 24. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out, saying, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me." David froze. It was exactly what he had seen: the screams, the torment, the fire. And just like in the Bible, there was no escape. His hands trembled as he gripped the Bible tighter. "God, you were showing me the truth all along. I was too blind to see it." Now, everything made sense. God hadn't just sent him back to save him. He had sent him back to warn others. Chapter 11, The Mission Begins. David quit his job. He gave up everything: his old life, his old habits, his old friends. Instead, he dedicated himself fully to spreading the message. He started talking in churches. He went on radio shows. He shared his story with thousands of people. Some laughed, some doubted, but others, they listened. People started coming to him, crying, confessing their sins, asking how they could be saved. David smiled through his tears. Jesus is the way, he told them. Give your life to him, because hell is real. and you don't want to go there. Chapter 12, the warning for us all. David's story is more than just a terrifying experience. It's a wake-up call, because one day we will all face eternity. Where will you go? Will you be like David before the accident, living for yourself, ignoring God? Or will you turn to Jesus now, before it's too late? Because once your time is up, there are only two choices: heaven or hell. And as David knows too well, hell is forever. David's story is real, and it's not just his story. Millions of people have seen hell and lived to warn the world. Now the choice is yours. Will you listen, or will you wait until it's too late? If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. 1. Like this video to help more people see this message. 2. Share it with someone who needs to hear the truth. 3. Subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories and powerful messages about Jesus. And remember, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Turn to Him before it's too late.